It is not an easy line to find. I mean, the scientific method offers us some tools to use, some best practices, even some pre-engineered value judgments, let's put it that way. It is not infallible. I'll give you an example. The scientific method presupposes that we can isolate all the circumstances, all the variables that matter to an experiment within a laboratory setting. So you're only allowing the variables to play a causal role in what you're experimenting with, the variables that you know. Everything else you controlled for or eliminated. And then it expects that it can trigger any phenomenon under those controlled conditions in a laboratory. Well, that is an incredibly constraining assumption that, presupposes that all causal influences in reality operate at a microscopic level, because you can only isolate things in the confines of a small laboratory if the causal chains here are only microscopic and operate locally. But many of the stuff people call psi, I would imagine that they are only triggered under circumstances that evoke one's emotional reaction. And you can't have that in a laboratory setting. Or you could have natural causal chains that operate only over large distances at the level of families or societies or cultures, all of which is beforehand eliminated by this notion that you should be able to see everything under laboratory settings. Why? Why should reality conform to our experimental convenience? Reality is what it is. If we can't trigger a phenomenon in a laboratory, it doesn't mean that the phenomenon doesn't exist. It only means that it's very hard to study. We have to use observational science as opposed to experimental science. And there is nothing non-scientific about it. Astronomy is an observational science. You can't trigger a black hole in a laboratory or a quasar. You are limited to watching it with care.
The notion that if something exists, that it has to or can exist that way every time and for every person is absurd. It's the equivalent of saying, I've had great sex before, and so I assume I will have great sex with every single person I have sex with. That's like, it doesn't work like that. You could put me in an appropriate setting that is just like the setting I had, and I will not have an orgasm, I promise, right? Because it is dependent on the mood I'm in, what I saw on Instagram that morning, who the president has censored, what's going on in global politics, and hormone fluctuations and things that do not travel. I mean, if you want to question science, be a woman in perimenopause, you know? There's no chart. All those charts, this is your luteal phase. When you get to like 40, it's like, fuck it. That's what it's like to try and recreate something in the lab.
This is the first conversation about consciousness that has gone to menopausal sex.
Oh, then you're not having enough conversations. That's a major event in consciousness, I suppose. No! I'm totally with you there. People who think like that, and I'm not saying this to put people down, but they are not serious participants in the discussion. And it's perfectly okay to be like that. I'm not a serious participant in a discussion about art. What is not okay is to not be a serious one, but think you are and act accordingly. That's a kind of intellectual arrogance that backfires spectacularly because one just makes a fool of oneself. People make a lot of metaphysical assumptions in the process of denying metaphysics. This happens all the time. And it happens even in language. For instance, when people say, can consciousness exist outside the body? What is the assumption they are making? Dualism. There is the body and there is consciousness. Well, it's not the only option. It could be that the body is a construct in consciousness, and therefore consciousness is not in the body. It's the body that is in consciousness. And then you say that and people go like, oh, let me think about that. Well, there's a menu of hypotheses that are internally consistent, perfectly coherent, but which requires a little thoughtfulness and not knee-jerk metaphysical reactions based on assumptions one doesn't even know one is making. And that's why often these people are not serious participants in the discussion. They don't even know what assumptions they're making.